Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Thursday where we are doing a deep dive into a neurodiversity subject. Today, we have a special guest, so we're mixing the format up a little bit, and we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and maybe Twitter. I don't know. But thank you, thank you. If you are here, do let me know in the chats, say hi. A bit normal to our typical Thursdays where we have a interactive Zoom session. I just like to keep it fresh, mix it up a little bit. So if you are around, let me know in the chat. It's always nice to know. For instance, Emma, are you there? LaDonna, Leo, where's my regulars? Now, oh, yes. Oh, Rodrigo, nice to have you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Molly, lovely. Rachel, hi. Anna Marie, yes, Anna Marie's back. Yo, G Wheeler, great to have you. Oh, nice. And on YouTube, brilliant. Sam, fantastic. Okay, it's comforting to know that people have turned up. Woohoo, Kirsty, brilliant. Vanja, this is nice. Okay, so my name's Nat, and I am neurodivergent. I also have a master's in neuroscience, and I work at an organization called Exceptional Individuals. We are a social enterprise, and we're now 10 years old. How time flies. And we support people who think differently to not just understand how their brain works, but to really embrace it. Yes. Hi, Chris. Hi, Samantha. Oh, hi, Abby. Connecting from the east coast of Canada. That's amazing. Most people, I'd imagine, are in the UK, but if you aren't in the UK, let us know. Let's kick it off, right? So our guest today is someone who I actually supported and trained many moons ago, and we learned about neurodiversity, understanding, and I thought to kind of revisit and see how they're doing now could be quite interesting. So let's do the intro. Joan Laine is a strategy and transformation consultant at Turner and Townsend. They drive people-centric change. They have a late diagnosis of dyslexia, dyspraxia, and audio ADHD. All right, bragging much. Even more than me. They have lived experience that has shaped how they work in the workplace and how they have adapted policies. They are a champion of neurodiversity, and they have helped support an initiative called Neurodiversity at TT. They have created a campaign called Just Ask, which helps foster inclusive communication, particularly around neurodiversity. They are part of a network lead. They have helped the organization become disability confident leader status. That's like the #1 status in the UK. Essentially, it means the organization will try their best, but a leader status is better. Maybe we'll go into that a bit more. They also are proficient in a range of leadership and change management techniques, ones that I've never even heard of, but I look forward to hearing about them. And they are coaching and a a good mentor. So without any more delay, onto the stage, Joan, great to have you.
Thanks, Nat. It really is a pleasure to be here today. From our initial meeting in 2021, it was so quite a few years ago. I've learned a lot about neurodiversity in general, and of course, my own neurodivergence, or neurodivergence. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here today. On the other side as well.
Well, Joan, I'm going to pass the screen over to you to just give us a bit more of some backstory from your own life experience, how you got to where you are today, understand a bit about your diagnosis, and then we'll do a nice little smooth transition onto some Q&A and look at some of your slides, if that's good with you.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of some of my slides, I've only got one slide, which I'll put it up now, and I'll probably pop it in and pop out. So I'm just going to present now the first slide. Let's see if I've got this right. or I'll ask Nat. Nat, if you can put up my first slide, that would be really helpful. Because of course, oh, perfect. There you go. So this is me. On the one hand, so I am a mom and grandmom mom. I have three boys. My eldest is actually going to be 40, which is just like, oh my gosh. And yeah, three lovely grandchildren, two boys, two girls. And I have lived. Was born and raised in the UK. I've lived in France for 20 years, lived in South Africa for 20 years, and then back in the UK. So call myself a global citizen. Late diagnosed as dyspraxic. It started with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then autism, ADHD from 2021, which it is a game changer. It's a life changer as well. And I have become a self-advocate in neurodiversity because of my journey. So today we'll look at some of the strategies. That's my overview in terms of what I've done. But yeah, so we'll be looking at what then does that journey look like in terms of the first part of it, which was an introduction to neurodiversity from Matt, and the spiky profile. That's where I actually started my journey, and how that started to help me to understand actually who I am and why I do things the way that I do them. It's helped me to also understand my learning styles. And so just in terms then of how did I find out about it. I had entered um, higher education, further education studies, and it was my lecturer who suggested that I might be dyslexic, and possibly, might be ADHD, and I might benefit from an assessment. Um, and so this is me going into academia at the grand old age of 58 years old, and having not done any kind of formal education before that, or tertiary education before that. So it was a huge surprise to find out that dyslexia, yes, I suspected it, but I didn't realize just how much it actually impacts the way that I function, the way that I understand things, memorize things. I thought it really was just a thing about inverting words, and finding it difficult to put together words in writing. So finding out that it's a lot more than that, and that it's also classified officially as a disability. That was, the first part of my emotional roller coaster in terms of this is who I've always thought I've been, understanding that there were some things that I knew was very different, and then having to kind of like think about, so am I disabled, am I not disabled, and that particular question went backwards and forwards for quite some time, for at least 2 years before I was comfortable with being that I am disabled. I'm disabled by um, the way that the world interacts with me. In terms from that inclusion point of view, it's not always easy to accommodate, the things that I need in my everyday life, and it's understanding that that made me say yes. Then I am disabled from that point of view. However, I also discovered where my strengths lied on the journey. And I also discovered that for each of us that are late diagnosed, or maybe you were diagnosed when you were young, and then you're approached in a certain way when you're a child, but when you come into the workplace and into the adult world, it's a very different approach for those who may have had lots of support when they were younger. In the workplace in general, the workplace is not quite there yet in terms of the support that they offer. So my journey, um, from the dyslexia, then finding out about dyspraxia, um, it reinforced also that spiky profile. So I'm talking about the spiky profile because it's very important, I think, that we understand, and everyone who may not know what a spiky profile is, that many of us who are neurodiverse, spiky profile is at the top end. We look, sorry, I need to take the presentation off so you can see me. I didn't realize I'm still sitting there with the presentation when I'm talking to you. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, at the top end, I'm very good at analytics, for example. And when I say I'm very good at analytics, so at the top end of the spike, it's literally, between the 95 to 100%. And at the bottom end of the spike, so for example, things like grammar and writing, at the very bottom of the spike, then I'm sitting literally in the 5%, right? And then in the other, there's other areas, and it's literally, you have that spiky profile. Neurodivergent people, often we have that spiky profile. Neuro atypical people usually have, like, they may have a peak up here, and it's a lot smoother. So understanding that also on my journey has been helpful. I think maybe if I show, no, I'm not going to put the slides up. Yeah, so understanding that about myself has been very insightful, and has really helped with taming the imposter syndrome. So on the diagnosis journey, it takes quite a long time to get the diagnosis, and so there's all of these questions that are constantly coming. Am I not neurodivergent? Am I dyslexic? Yes, okay, I'm dyslexic. Dyspraxia, what on earth does that mean? Okay, yes, okay, I fit this, I fit that, but I don't fit that. So there's a lot of self-doubt that comes into it. And then there is also, if for those of you who know the Kubler-Ross, the change curve, or the 7 stages of grief, we absolutely go through, and I say we go through that. It's more a cycle than just the curve, because there's several iterations of going through the Kubler-Ross change curve, where you basically find out about it, then you're surprised and possibly angry. Then you fall into, that part of despair. Then you start to say, okay, well, maybe, yeah, maybe I can accept this. And then you move into, well, okay, so what does that look like in the future? And then you move on to adoption and commitment, and you start looking at new ways of doing things. And that curve, or I'd say, as I said, it's a cycle that happens several times until you get to a stage where you say, okay, well, this is actually me. Um, so um, I'm not sure if Matt can hear me, but I would like to ask him the question um, about the spiker profile, if he wants to say a little bit more on that. So I'm going to stop presenting for a second. Oh, there you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the spiky profile, it's a good way to talk about neurodivergence, because typically we look at it from a deficit perspective, which is depressing and also factually not true. So we often look at things that people aren't very good at, like can't read very well, can't communicate very well, poor and that's only one half of the story. The spiky profile is looking at how spiky someone is. Yes, they may struggle at certain things, but if they struggle at certain things, they also benefit from certain things and also have a lot of strengths. So where a neurotypical person is more of a jack of all trades, a neurodiverse per individual or group have more kind of a stronger fluctuation. And that was some of the things that we spoke about back in the day.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now, yes, I'll put up the other slide. So slide 3. Thank you very much. So yeah, so as I said, it started with that spiky profile and moved on to the late diagnosis, and I've just mentioned the the imposter syndrome. Now, all of these changes, they are life changing. It does cause disruption. And there is a period of transition, and the period of transition will depend on each individual, depends on the support that we have, it depends on who exactly we are as well, as a person. So if you're more of a go-getter, and more introverted, and also it depends on your well-being, your general well-being, your mental health, etc. So that period of transition can be, I don't know anyone who's managed to transition from when they first thought they might be neurodivergent to when they actually, got to that place of, okay, well, this is me, this is a new me, this is etc. But I don't know anyone who's done it in less than 2 years. And my journey, I would say, has probably been, I'd say it's three. It's been three, where of that journey of discovery. A part of it was um, being the lead on diverse ability at Turner and Townsend. For it ended up being for about 3 years, and that journey itself. That's where I got into the self advocacy. The self advocacy came because when I asked for support, Turner and Townsend were like, "Yes, absolutely. We're here for you." So the company has been and still is very supportive. However, they didn't have it in place. So they said, "Oh, would you like to, have a look into it? We'll journey with you." And so, we've journeyed together in terms of the discovery from a business point of view, and then from myself, in terms of what my requirements are. Now, the reason why I am pushing that self advocacy is because I've also realized that, so that disruptive phase, there are so many different choices that we have to make, and there are personal choices, there are business choices, there are with our friendships, the way that we do things, trying to understand ourselves as we're trying to say to somebody in the workplace, this is what we need. So if we're saying that we need reasonable adjustments, I remember the first conversation, and I was asked, what do I need? And I was like, I honestly don't know. I really don't know. And so that space of not knowing, so I don't know what I don't know, all of these things leads to that. It's very destabilizing, and it impacts our work. It impacts what we used to be able to do fairly easily. And all of a sudden, many of us find that we can't do what we used to do. And that is as we're readjusting to, okay, well, actually, um, now that I'm starting to understand my neurotype, um, there are things that I've always struggled with, and they take lots of time. So the heavy masking that we were used to doing, we start to drop the mask. Because we stop to drop the mask, we actually don't have the capacity to do things in the way that we did before. So this is where the disruption is. The disruption is just in our everyday lives. It's in what we do at work, things that we found normal, and yes, I put the word neurospicy in there, because in the indie world, there are a lot of different terms that we use, and some of them we like, we adopt, some of them we don't. Neurospicy is one of the ones that I like, and the reason why I like that is because my quirks that I've always had, I understand that they are part of my neurospiciness. That's what makes me me, and in this disruption and transition, I was then able to actually just say, okay, yeah, I'm claiming that. I'm no longer going to, I'm not going to mask that anymore. I'm going to, this is me. So we start to discover our authentic self. Um, and then you'll see me looking forward, because it's just really tiny even for me. And then my slides. So the inclusive part of it, of this disruption, is it's linking into that self-advocacy. There's a part about being vulnerable, but in that vulnerability, how much do we disclose and how much do we keep back? Um, and how we find out about that is actually by making ourselves vulnerable and experimenting. I'm just going to pause now just to see if there's any questions or anything that because I don't want to just talk the whole way through. Um, Nat, do you have any questions? Do you have a
Well,
question, or does
I'm just looking
anyone
at the
from the
comments,
audience?
and we've got people sharing when they were diagnosed. We've got a lot of people who were diagnosed later in life. Oh, Eveline, greetings. I was diagnosed late, just a few years back now. Abby was also diagnosed 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, Rachel was diagnosed back in uni, but also think that they probably have other undiagnosed neurodivergence. Emma was diagnosed at 42, and Anna Marie still has not been diagnosed. Took a test in college over 30 years ago, and I was under the threshold. That, Anna, is a very common thing. If you don't quite meet the criteria, you miss out on a lot of the support. And Sam is an employer wishing to understand how they can best support their employees.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of that, so Sam's question and also just acknowledging all of the comments about the late diagnosis. That part of it is, it can be very lonely even when you're supported. Um, and so finding your own tribe is really important there, to find a tribe that you're comfortable with, where you can be vulnerable, you can share, etc. And then, from an employee point of view, or supporting the employee or the organization, that is where I learned a lot more about myself, and that's where the self-advocacy came in. And the reason why is because, so I know myself. I've been me my whole life, right? So I know myself. Um, the imposter syndrome that I've had all of my life, with the diagnosis, it gave clarity as to actually those parts of me that I was told can't be true, they are true. So I could actually embrace that. So that's really good, on the one side. And then those parts of me that, I recognize that I struggle and I battle with, and I always have. Where the self advocacy comes in is being able to say, okay, so within that, there are things that I can do very, very, very well. And there are things that I've always battled with. And going forward, now that I know that this is the way that my brain functions, this is, I do things this way because of, how I process things. Um, so I can change the way that I do things. So the ways of working. So some of the things that we've put in place. So with my, I had sponsors at the company. So one of the things that we put together was something called Just Ask. And it sounds really, in a way, it sounds condescending. Just say, oh, just ask. Um, it sounds a bit flippant. But what we did was, so what I actually put together was a structure in which there's 4 scenarios that we can use in the workplace, and where we can do it ourselves. We can say, okay, when we're joining a team, because in consulting, we are constantly forming teams. We're constantly forming teams because we're constantly going on new projects. We are also constantly going on teams because we might be putting bids together, etc. So we're always meeting new people, and then we're meeting new clients. So one of the things in terms of that self-advocacy is, if we set up a process where we have the tools to just ask in a way that that is structured. We could, for example, I'll give an example of when we've just joined a new team, and we can use the just ask to introduce ourselves. And so the format is to say, here's the team. And in that format we ask, okay, so what are your strengths in terms of your ways of working? What do you prefer? How do you prefer to communicate? And then the second, so everyone gets a chance to talk about that. what are your challenges? So what are the things that you can do but you find you may have difficulty in? So I'll give you an example. So for me, so my strengths are, I'm a visionary. I really, I I think if I put up the third slide just to give an idea of this one, if you can just put up that third slide, right? So my strengths, yeah, I'm in strategy and business change. I am a visionary. I have strategic thinking, and in the change management space, so doing change impact assessments, etc. So that's the actual delivery, and I'm fairly good at problem solving. Then I have my behavioral change aspects. So as much as I'm an introvert, there are a number of things that I actually am very good at, and that is mentoring, coaching, and I have some good listening skills, etc. In terms of team effectiveness, it is about developing high performing teams through that interconnectedness. And my challenges are so as much as so I'm visionary, I can actually get stuck in the detail. But from a business point of view, we all have to do project management. And there are several ways of doing project management. And one of them is called waterfall. And that is when you have to do all these detailed, and it's all these project management, something like MS project management, and there are many reasons why I just find that I've always found it challenging, but I understand it's to do with dyslexia. It's absolutely the dyslexia, and also it's the way that my memory, my short-term memory, moves things into the medium to long-term memory. By the time I've gone across a spreadsheet, I have no clue what I was seeing at the beginning. So this doesn't work for me at all, but on the projects we need to use it a lot. So for me, that's where I would ask for help. Um, in terms of reading, writing, and spelling, so when I read, there are things that I didn't realize that there are. I literally don't see them. So I'm reading, but there's pieces missing, and I can read it 3 times, 4 times, and it will still be missing. So if something is needed rapidly, quickly, then I would, ask to delegate that. So this is where I'm saying, these are my challenges. It's not that I can't do them; they're just harder to do. Um, and then organization and planning. So ADHD, dyslexia, those are the things that I find challenging. So what this does with the just ask is basically for the whole team, we could just be talking about, you know, so what are your strengths? What are your challenges? And what are the things that will help you in order to be able to, to be at your optimum in the team? And it really does help. It's changed completely my confidence. So I've got my confidence back. It's changed the way that I interact with my colleagues, because all of us are actually sharing what are the things that work for us. So from a a team perspective, in the workplace, that's one of the things that actually makes that's actually very impactful. WOW stands for ways of working. Um,
I also
Emma,
did wonder that, Emma, so don't
sorry,
worry.
I'm so sorry. I forgot to
I thought
actually
it
write
stood
it,
for
spell it
World of
out.
Warcraft, but
Yes,
both
it does
good.
stand for that too. So ways of working, and then yes. So
But
Sam, your
Joan, before
Sam's
we go
questions.
on,
Yeah.
I realised that the introduction went on way long, so we haven't even gotten to the questions.
Ah,
So
yeah. I know. That's why I was just waffling, because I was like, Nat.
I
Okay.
could
Yeah.
tell. Yeah, yeah. Just all right. So we're going to do a fire round questions, okay?
Good.
And
Thank you.
again, short and simple. So maybe like a couple of minutes, and then we'll go through them because we've got quite a few to get through. So the first one is you received a neurodivergent diagnosis later in life. What changed most in how you view yourself and professional path? So you've already been briefly touching about this, but I'd love to know a bit more. What is the key difference from how you saw yourself prior to how you see yourself now?
The key difference is always, knowing that I'm different, not understanding why I was different, and always feeling that, like, really feeling misunderstood, because I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why.
Hmm.
I knew I was different, but I couldn't articulate what it was. And so the biggest difference, through my life, whether it's professionally or at home, it's given me more confidence to know, okay, well, no, one, these things that you knew about yourself that you kept on saying or others kept on saying it wasn't correct, they are true. So that validation is really important. It's just having that, okay, well, yeah, that's who I am. So finding my authentic self for the first time, I've discovered it a few times and been told, no, 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 you that's not the way. You can't do this, you can't behave like that, you're not experiencing what you're experiencing. So that's the biggest change I would say is uh, in terms of my confidence is not coming from somebody else validating me.
Yeah.
It's coming from myself. That's the
Okay.
biggest switch.
And I'd also like to open that question out to all of you watching, because I think it's quite an interesting question. Because you've got a lot of people who have said in the chat that I got a diagnosis later in life, but I kind of want to know the next step. Was it even worth it? Did you make any kind of big resonate, like, oh wow, or no difference whatsoever? I mean,
Yeah,
having a quick look, we've got Molly who says, I think it's a great idea to share the WoW, World of Warcraft, no ways of working with a team. As someone who is waiting to fund a private ADHD/autism assessment, sharing a way of working would benefit me in advocating for myself professionally.
yeah,
And we often have a lot of things. Some people call them work passports, career plans. They have a wide variety of names, but essentially, how do you work? How do you listen? How do you understand? What's your preference can make a huge difference.
yeah. And I think, just to add to that, Nat. So there's the how, in terms of that ways of working. But that first part, that first the part of the journey, it's really, getting to know yourself and understand that even as you're journeying towards the self-diagnosis, because it takes a long time, you're going to be discovering a lot of things about yourself. You're going to find people who are exactly like, well, very similar to you. And so you'll get that validation anyway without the diagnosis. But sometimes we need the diagnosis as well just to feel that this is true. Get rid of the imposter syndrome completely. Um, and with that, as I said, your confidence grows more. Now, that part of the journey also, I didn't do it alone. I went, I actually got neurodiversity strategy coaching, which many people aren't aware of, but that really does help. And I also got mental health support because I went down into that, I went down into the depression because it's part of that journey of the self-discovery. So yes, it's not some there's no magic wand. It is a journey, and to go back to the professional questions that are being asked around, so how do I support an employee where we've gone through all of these stages and we've gone through all of these reasonable adjustments, and the employee is still struggling and we're still struggling, as the line manager or as the business. um, every journey is personal. One of the things that I found in common for all of us that were going through our journeys, through in the workplace at my company, is there comes a point where the language starts to switch, or it feels like, it's not just it feels like, the language starts to switch to performance management. And of course, what happens then is that instead of bringing us together on the journey, we now start to sit in opposite parts. Because at that stage, also, the person who's going through all of those changes, if they have not got mental health support because they've never had it before, they don't know where to get it, or because they think that they've had it but it's not worked. So, for example, CBT for many of us doesn't work, and everything, all of the mental health care that we get, the majority of it is CBT. Um, this is again where the self-advocacy comes in, where we're saying, okay, these are the things, even in therapy, even in the strategy coaching, I was just like, I don't know what I don't know. So you're asking me a question, can you please give me some guidance? That's where I started to get more assertive, and that's the biggest difference in the change in
Okay.
me.
So, Joan, let's take what those learnings further now, because those are like the basics, like understanding yourself. To taking it to a more of a professional space, How did a late diagnosis influence your approach to leadership, especially in driving organizational change? So, quite an interesting question. That did this kind of understanding the why and yourself have an impact in how you might help organizations change?
Yeah. So for the question specifically on reasonable adjustments, the disability confident accreditation is an accreditation for organizations who want to support their disabled employees, and that can be people who have hidden or visible disabilities. The neurodivergent community, many of us don't feel that we are disabled. However, it's important to go through that avenue, because when you go through that avenue, you start to be able to influence um, process systems and process changes within the organizations. So, for example, the recruitment process, you start to influence how we write the ads, so that they are more inclusive, they start to be more accessible. We start to influence from that reasonable adjustment point of view. So facilities, how if somebody's coming into the organization, or even before they come into the organization, how accessible are our processes. So specifically, because I used disability confident, it helped me to actually structure how the different stages in terms of one, raising awareness about neurodiversity, and then also bringing on board leadership, the line managers. So things like making sure that we had the training in place, so neurodiversity training. So it's taken a while. As I said, it's a journey, and then also making sure that we've got allies. What is an ally? What does that mean? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of getting together working task groups so that you can work on, like, for example, the recruitment piece, work on the communications piece, work on the actual reasonable adjustments, work with facilities. And so it's actually putting that in place. And that's again where the self-advocacy came in, because that didn't exist. So I had to help put that structure in place. And today we now have a neurodiversity network and group, and there's active work streams that are doing many different things.
Cool. Thanks for that, Joan. I think it's really interesting to highlight the benefits and the strengths that come from this adversary and how we use it as a strength. Now, we've talked about the benefits, and I think you can't talk about the benefits without talking about the challenges. But as you rightly said earlier on, are we disabled? Yeah, but are we disabled because we are inherently broken? No. Are we
No.
disabled because it is a societal barriers and essentially the world didn't take us into consideration? Yes. So the next question is, in your experience, what is the biggest gaps in how organizations typically support neurodivergent employees?
The
What are
biggest
they missing out on?
the biggest gap is on so career development, for example. So we've started to get it right in terms of being able to attract people who are different in the organization, and that's great, because we really are bringing in people who have different ways of thinking, etc., and the creativity that they bring, etc. But then what? So we bring in somebody like myself. I was brought in because of my different ways of thinking. I really do think quite differently. So innovation, etc. The organization hasn't moved fast enough, hasn't evolved fast enough. It's what they want. However, the systems. So I spoke about, for example, there's IT, facilities, HR. Those three just are the main ones. So it's for the systems also to have been updated so that they understand. What I say is, when there's onboarding, you have your onboarding and you have your standard operating process of onboarding people, right?
Mhm.
And so that's SOP 1. And then you have your standard operating process 2, because the person has said, actually, I've got a wellness passport or a health passport, and I need some accommodations. And so you know that at the time when you recruit, and so you kick into SOP 2 or B, right? Now, in that one, ideally for not an organization that's matured, so that's grown and that's understood and has gone through the process, they would have your standard operating process for onboarding, and then they will have the second one. And in the second one, they would have already, from an asset point of view in IT, I'm using corporate language, but anyway, from an asset point of view in IT, they would already have certain software, accessible tools, headphones, certain things that they would just have some of that in stock, the same way as they have your electronic mouse. Um, they would have already understood that if a person says that they have sensory issues, for example, there's space for those quiet rooms. So that's what's missing. The will and intent is absolutely there. However, the systems are still lagging behind. And then that other part that I said, the actual career development path. What does that mean? So if I'm a specialist, which I am, why would you put me into a generalist career path? And so there's still that needs to be adjusted, and it's a journey. I'm not going to be vilifying anyone, because the one thing that I experienced all of the time was that the will to actually grow and learn with us was there from every single person that I've engaged with. However, the systems have not been updated and the
Mm.
policies have not been updated. So that's the gap.
I think with the gaps, you're absolutely right. A lot of the time, I suppose the thing that I get hung up about is there is change happening, but I often wonder how meaningful the change actually is. Is it just a token gesture, for example? And we briefly spoke about disability confidence statuses. For those of you who may not have heard of them or outside of the UK, it's kind of like a badge, and it's like, okay, so there's 3 levels. You've got disability confident, which is, you know, I swear to be good, even though there's no criteria. Then you've got disability confident employer, which is, there's a few more regulations, a few more hoops you've got to jump through. And then the last one is disability confident leader, which is a bit more rigorous. And their type of things could be that if someone declares they have a disability, then you'll give them an interview. If someone needs reasonable adjustments, you'll give them without a second thought. There's a few different kind of practices. Yet the question I want to ask you is that even though it is a great step, and I'm not knocking the step because, as you said, change happens in like small parts and it's not overnight, still though, is there any kind of like tangible indicators that real inclusion is happening? I state that because I've worked with a number of companies which on paper were disability confident leaders, but in reality weren't actually practicing any kind of meaningful change.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right in terms of the levels. So TNT is at a disability confident employer status going to leader, right? And so that second stage is where the work is done. So the first level, you say, this is what I'm going to commit to. In the second stage, you say, okay, so you said you're going to commit to them. What does that mean? What are the KPIs? So what are the key performing indicators? How are we going to measure it? And so, for example, in recruitment, you would say, okay, in recruitment, it would mean we're going to put A, B, C in place, and we're also going to measure the increase in the people with disabilities that we're bringing into the company from point A to this point. So, for example, that would be one of the measurements. Then from so there's recruitment. I'm just trying to think in my head now which ones we did, but we put in very clear indicators, which also accessibility. So accessibility, there is building accessibility. So what are we going to measure? The first thing we're going to measure is, okay, here's the audit. What have we got? Before we make any decisions, let's do an audit. So that's a clear measurement. Once we've got that, then we can say, okay, so what else do we need to put in place? And so it could be making sure that all of the lifts have braille in them, for example. Um, we're not going to go and do a revamp of a building and put ramps in if the building doesn't have ramps in. If it wasn't the intention, we're not going to do that. So that's why it's called reasonable adjustments as well. Then part of the disability confident was also the awareness was really important. So the first year, it really is just building awareness about what does it mean, what does reasonable adjustments mean, and that keeps on coming back as a conversation, because what we want it to be and what the organization can offer, as everyone's trying to understand what it is, that's where there's the most blockages and challenges in the conversations. So if the accreditation process is done where it is that tick box, then very quickly after a year, you're not going to see any changes at all. You won't see any changes in the organization. So they'll keep on saying that they are, reasonable, disability confident employers. However, if we are actually managing what those changes are, we put in clear KPIs, we can see what those changes are. So, for example, I keep on going back to the reasonable adjustments because it has been the biggest change. It is about putting in place a health passport. The health passport is, so that's what we're calling it. The health passport, we did that with task groups. We went backwards and forwards. We sat with HR. We went to, I saw there was a question about, can I have an example of a health passport? So if you go to the Access to Work website, or if you go to the government Department of Pensions, Work and Pensions, they have the health passport there. They also have the Access to Work passport and the process there. It's daunting initially. So again, it needs to be a supported process. And so I found that all out because I literally had to go and find out all these things for myself. Waiting for the organization to give it to me, it's not that they don't want to, they don't know what it is. That makes sense. And even if they go
Yes.
out to look for it, because they're not sitting from they can't understand what the challenges are. It's just quite difficult. So yeah, they fall short, and it's not a.
All right. Well, I think this aligns perfectly with a question we have from Fee, who I'm going to bring up in a sec. Now, if any of the rest of you have any questions that you would like to ask, now is the part where I'm opening up to any questions anyone else has. So let's have a little look at this question. Fee says, I think changes are assumed based on what people think we need, rather than what was realizing divergent means different. Thus, all our needs are going to vary. For example, everyone says, just do a mind map. To me, that is the worst. I need to see information in a linear way. My head and ideas are mind mapped already. What I need to bring it together, not scatter it even more. So I suppose the kind of open question from Fee there is that how do we get employers to know what we need if we don't even know what we need? Like these reasonable adjustments are only reasonable if they're kind of collective. I mean, for instance, as an employer, how do you know what someone needs beyond
So so
asking them?
so I disagree that they're collective. There are some that are collective. So I mentioned, so we could say, quite often we need headphones. There are certain things, and and there was a question about the software. Software that's often used is the Dragon. I forgot what it's called. Um, I could
Dragon
share that.
Dictate?
Sorry.
Are you on about the nuanced Dragon Dictate
Yes,
software?
yes, that's often mentioned. However, I've been actually DWP recommended Glean, and Glean is absolutely brilliant for transcribing meetings, for being able to present while you're in the meeting. It's a brilliant tool, and I find it, and even in terms of actually the note taking that it takes, it's fairly
I've
accurate.
never used that one, to be honest, so I'll
I only
definitely give it
found
a
out
try.
about it last year.
Well, Molly
It's
also
usually
recommends it, so thanks
it's
for the
brilliant.
that.
It's brilliant. So that one is, again, so there's two things that have been a life changer for me is Glean and Remarkable tablet. But I only
Yeah,
got them last year, at the end of last year, and it really makes a difference. So going back to the to fee. Oh, so going back to why I disagree with, there's a collective. We are as individual as neurotypical people are. That's it. We are that individual. So we may have, disorders that might be common. However, our needs are very different. So for me, it really is about that just us. It's first of all find out for ourselves. And Fee just said it. This is what I prefer. This is how I prefer the information for myself.
mm,
But we can't do that if we haven't done that piece of work on ourselves, because we're always being told, or before, I was always being told, well, actually, you just need to do what everyone else is doing. Don't understand why you can't do it. You've been using Excel for 20 years. You should be able to do this. And so it meant that I felt that, there was a deficit and I was broken. And then I realized, actually, no, I can't do it because I am neurodiverse and I just cannot do this thing. So once we realize that, that's where the boundary comes in, to say, well, actually, even if I spend another 3 years training on this, I'm going to improve by 2%. What is the point? So I'm not going to put energy and effort in there. These are
mm.
the things. Fee has made it very clear. For her, it's linear. For me, it's mind map. And you see, there's already those two different ways. And that's actually, in terms of the self advocacy, it is understanding what are our preferences, how do we prefer to work, and in terms of how do we prefer to receive the information. So I also prefer to have an agenda before, even like 3 bullets. Don't give me a book. 3 bullets, and then the feedback, I also prefer to have it bulleted. But again, not too much information. So small bites of information, and I can move forward. Whereas before, I'd get all the info and go down the rabbit hole, and get lost
And
in the rabbit hole.
is that what you would put in your ways of working or passport to let
Yeah,
people know? Because I
yeah.
think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that
If you
it's
put
a
this up
journey
again,
that you have to figure out yourself with your manager. And I think Jodie has I want to share Jodie's comment because I think it shows good self-awareness of what works for you. They have said, as an individual, I have found it really useful to tell my managers that I'm still learning and that I may need support in other areas. I like that to start with because it is true, we are always learning. Just
yeah,
because we are neurodivergent doesn't mean we have an encyclopedia of everything that is actually going to help us. They
yes,
say that they are still learning, they want support in other areas going forward. In general, though, they think having a dark sensory space, headphones, etc., can help many and entities alike. So I think
yes,
what Jodie is saying here is, while we all have our own individual preferences and it is definitely useful to go on that journey, there are some kind of broad things which could be beneficial for a large number of people. And
yes.
as an organization, and let's say you only have a certain pot of money, how might you decide where that money goes in terms of making things inclusive?
So many of the inclusive things, Jodie's pointed it out as well. Many of the inclusive things actually don't require money, because they are to do with the behaviors.
Hmm.
So you know so somebody who prefers to have, that quiet space. So where it is possible to find a quiet space in the office, that's an accommodation that can be made. And yes, the question is, well, what happens if we can't? The whole conversation around inclusiveness, it is about actually inclusiveness. When we're inclusive, everyone benefits, the whole team benefits, the whole organization benefits.
Yeah.
So it's really about, okay, well, okay, so we don't have that space in the organization. let's have a look and think, how can we make this work? Rather than saying, well, you can't have it at all, and you've just got to make do. So it's the openness, being willing to be open, generally pot of money specifically for, for accommodations. The budgets would sit in IT for something like special headphones, for the hardware, for so the licenses, so for special licenses like Glean or like Dragon Naturally Speaking, Nuance Dragon Naturally Speaking, that is where then the access to work comes in, and they give a grant for parts, they fund part of it, and the organization funds the rest. But much of the reasonable adjustments is to do with it's ways of working, it's changing our behaviors, and it
Yeah,
is to do with the dialogue, and also ensuring that the dialogue doesn't shift to performance management, because we're hitting a stumbling block in what we're wanting from the person who's trying to discover themselves, and what the business still wants them to perform. So that's also where at the moment it's a gray area, it's not easy to navigate, but it is about the communication. It's really about creating trust,
yeah.
um inclusive, just being inclusive, and both parties saying, I don't know what I don't know, let me learn with you.
Mm. We mentioned access to work quite a lot, and again, for those who aren't aware, it's a grant in the UK which allows organisations to have discounted support for ND individuals. Now, Sam mentioned, is this the employee's responsibility? It's kind of 50-50, to be honest with you. The general rules are, if a employer can tell that someone has a disability, which again is a bit broad in itself, they have to make reasonable adjustments. But with hidden conditions like neurodivergence, the onus does fall much more heavily on the individual, but the individual needs to have the knowledge to make those choices. I will say, though, that the current UK government is definitely cooking up something which I think is going to heavily reduce the threshold for whether or not you qualify for it. So I would say, while access to work and different grants are beneficial, I think organizations shouldn't and cannot rely on them going forward. I would like
Yeah,
to end on the last question, Joan, just because we are running out of time. And
yeah.
Cora, I saw your question. It's a great question, so we're going to ask it. They asked, given the late diagnosis, did you notice any new biases or stigma in the workplace? And if so, how did you handle them? I like this question because we always talk about the before, and then once we get the diagnosis, oh, it's beautiful. It continues. So anything new that came out as a result of it?
Um, I would say it's a really, it's funny that I can't just say yes or no. So obviously there was, but it would have been subtle. It's subtle. So the reason why I know that there was is because there was a period where I would just announce all of the time. When I would meet, when I'd start working with a new group, I would announce that I was neurodiverse, etc., etc. And it might not be that; it might just be that because I found the ways of working and I was able to articulate that in a way that for me is empowering. It might just be it's because of that switch. But I do know there was a period where I didn't say that at all. I didn't say anything.
Mm,
So there was a period where I was really open and vulnerable. Then there's a period where I closed and it's like, nope, not saying anything anymore. And then there was a period where, well, now I just, I don't necessarily have to speak specifically about being neurodivergent. I can speak about, as I said, my strengths and where I need help.
mm. Thanks for that. Now, I think we have pretty much approached the end, but Rachel has correctly said that the application for access to work is by the employee. Then access to work do the assessment,
Yes.
and then the recommendations are given to the employer. One thing that a
Yes.
lot of people get shocked by is that it's not a confidential process. So someone in HR or a manager will be aware, So heads up. But yep, you are also right, Rachel. It is a 12-month wait. So while I think it's always great to talk about all this fancy technology and equipment and support available, the emphasis should always be on the organization. We I think the welfare state as we know it is coming to an well, not coming to an end, but it is being severely impacted via budget cuts. So I think as a neurodivergent person, the best thing, in my opinion, has always been to understand yourself better, to get better at articulating how your mind works in order to educate other people. Because as you said, Joan, you don't know what you don't know. And I think when we see someone who is a manager, we assume that, of course, they've had training, of course, they have understanding in this. They
They
simply
don't.
do not.
They
Uh,
don't.
the way I
It's
normally
it's
kind
a dual journey. I would say that it's still a journey of discovery. I think the
of,
onus is on self, with support from the business.
yeah,
Um, I definitely don't think it is for the organization to be the responsible one. We can help them on the journey because it is too new. And what then happens is we get that tick box kind of thing.
the way I like to look at it is how you view your parents as a child, where you see them as a superhero who can do anything for you. But as you get older, you realize that they are just human and they have their own weaknesses too. I think biases and discrimination, well, maybe not discrimination, but biases are a very natural human thing. It's part of our condition, but it's being able to spot an awareness and pivot, which allows us to be better. I think it's been a really, really interesting chat, Joan. And I appreciate we've had so many great comments. I really love the interaction. We've had a great
Lots of
turnout
questions.
throughout. So I would just want to thank everyone so much for attending, and it's been fantastic. I would just also like to let you know that next week we are going back to our interactive sessions and we are doing a session on late diagnosed autism. Now, if you're thinking late onset autism, there actually isn't a thing as late onset autism, but it is a term that is often used. What we're actually talking about is autism which has been masked so heavily throughout your life that it's only in later life where it seems to appear, though it's always been there. So hopefully you can sign up via Eventbrite and check it out then. But yeah, once again, Joan, thank you so, so much for being with us today. And thank you
Thanks
everyone
so
for
much for
watching.
hosting me. Thank you so much, Nat. It's been a pleasure. It really has.
Cool. Cheers all. See you soon.